Welcome to my video on Predator Badlands. This is a brand new movie, 2025. I'm going to start with a review where I'm only spoiling the Predator movies up to this point, and after I've done the entire review, I'll verbally let you know that I'm getting into spoilers for this movie as well, so you can safely watch the review itself, provided you've already watched the previous Predator movies or don't care about spoilers. So the movie is rated PG-13, so will this video be. And yeah, I really love this movie. So I'm gonna quickly address a couple of things. First off, don't be scared off by the rating. I'm gonna talk more in detail about it later in this video before I get into spoilers, but just keep in mind what PG-13 means today. We're not talking like, yeah, if they made a PG-13 Predator movie in, I don't know, 2004, it would probably have been super frustrating. Oh wait, they did, and it was. But that's just not how, yeah. Today, the rating has been pushed significantly. You can just think about the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, especially the third one. It's, yeah. And I've seen some theorize, oh, maybe this is like a stealth aliens versus Predator movie, which, I don't know, I feel like they should almost save that title for a documentary about, eventually a bunch of immigrants are going to sue Trump. But yeah, there is some stuff here that's from the Alien franchise. That's not a spoiler. It's just not. Um, it's not an actual Alien versus Predator movie. It's possible that it'll lead to one. I'm hopeful. There's, a thing or two in this movie that I would like to see in an Aliens versus Predator movie. I think they're at a place where they can make a really good one, unlike the two that sucked. And yeah, I think that's the overall. Yeah, this is one of those movies. If you like the trailers, you're gonna like the movie. It very much is what it says on the box. Um, I think that is the overarching. So the setup here is quite well thought out, and yeah, I'm gonna briefly talk about. So I have in the past had the opinion, and I think I might have put it to video at some point or another, that they could not make a movie like this good. Maybe they wouldn't even try. I don't know. I think I misunderestimated Disney's unquenching thirst for profit, because, like, yeah, it's a company that really needs to treat its employees better, stand up to Trump more. They like money. They want, and this is not an anti-Semitic thing. I'm talking about, a bunch of the people at the top of Disney are white, so, and male. Yeah, they like money, and they realized this was a way to there are going to be people watching this movie that wouldn't have watched, they've had chances. There are 6 Predator movies before this one, since, I was going to say if we're counting, but we definitely should be. So we are counting Killer of Killers, Yeah, there's a thing or two about this movie that make it more, for it's a what do they call those again? 4-quadrant movie, there's basically something for almost everyone. I would not take a kid to this. It's PG-13. I'm not sure I would take someone under the age of 16 or 17 to this movie. I think, yeah. In the past, I didn't think they could get the tone right for this sort of thing. Here they did. That's like, recently they've been really good at getting the tone right for this and the Alien kind of stuff that they've been doing, movies and shows. Well, movie, I guess, is really only the one, but yeah. And I think, yeah, let's see. I guess I will briefly note, so others have already pointed out, and it's not really a spoiler, this is essentially a buddy comedy, and I would never have thought of that subgenre for the Predator franchise, but they make it work. Like, this is the kind of thing that if they got the tone just a little bit wrong, I would despise this movie, and I would tell you. I know I do a lot of positive reviews. I try to, I want it to be a positive channel these days. I don't want to spread too much negativity except about, how the far right is doing significant harm in the world. But yeah, they get it so right here. It's, yeah. So and the setup is also just it's one of those things that, like, listen, we've been asking for this for decades, like, let's have a Predator protagonist in one of these movies, and let's see him hunt something other than human. Like, okay, I get it, most dangerous game, yeah, okay, we've seen it. We don't need so many movies. Like, I think I've said before, let's see, 1, Prey, and Killer of Killers have reason to exist. I'm not sure I feel like the rest of them do. 2, 3, and 4, what do they add? Like, it's just the first one, and it's different, dressed up different. That's how they used to make sequels for a lot of franchises, not all. And yeah, now they're actually trying to do different things, and I'm not saying credit to Disney. I'm saying credit to the creatives who work on movies like this and shows like Alien Earth, Let's see. Yeah. The psychological accuracy is quite high. This is the first time that we really get a detailed look at, like, what makes a predator tick. The others, like, okay, they like to hunt. And sometimes there's convoluted lore crap, like in the fourth one, but that's about it. Here we actually have one that is humanized, if that makes sense to say, for an extraterrestrial. And that, again, is something I never would have thought would work. Yeah, they got it right. And it's also just, yeah, they thought of a setup that feels true to the Predator franchise. Like, I've already mentioned, this is a very different movie in some ways, not all, from the other Predator movies, but it does very much, respect the overall sort of the what's the word? Lore, I guess, is the, yeah. I think that covers that. So yeah, the authenticity is also quite high, and that can feel a little weird to say for a piece of sci-fi media, but everything felt like it fit within the world that they were building. That's, it's so frustrating when you watch sci-fi or fantasy, and there's just at least one element that feels like, okay, that just doesn't belong here, you know? Maybe it's a studio note. Maybe the writer or director can't kill their darlings, you know. And the level of detail is also very high. I love that we've gotten to this point. I know maybe I say it too often, but it keeps coming up. We've gotten to a point where you can just communicate so much visually. Like there's so many things in this movie where they don't sit down and give you a detailed verbal explanation. You just see what a thing is like, and then you're like, okay, that thing is like that, you know? It just allows these movies to have so much more. Like there is a pretty ridiculous amount of stuff in this movie. Like you would think on paper, if somebody told me, okay, so I'm not gonna give it away, but you know, there's gonna be X amount of stuff in this movie, I'd be like, you know what, I'm sorry, I think I'm gonna have to tap out. That's too much. I'm just gonna be like completely, you know, exhausted, and somehow they managed to not let that happen, which is genuinely impressive. So I guess I mentioned tone several times without really getting too much into it. Part of it is that I mentioned buddy comedy. A bunch of the jokes are morbid or otherwise, like, you know, adult humor, kind of, not like sexual, but like, you know, the kind of, yeah, not all of it morbid, but definitely not for like kids. And that makes it feel more, yeah. And the the way that they balance these, you know, lighter moments, and then the badass stuff, the dark stuff, the heavy stuff, I was very impressed. And let's see, I think, yeah, I'm not the first person to say it, but I think this has legs. It'll run and run. It's gonna really, it's opening up the franchise to a wider audience that maybe will hang on for, you know, I mean, I'm not asking for every Predator movie to be like this, but you know, yeah, it feels silly to say because there's no movie where I'm like, no matter how much I love a movie, you know, I love 1982's The Thing. If we had 10 movies that were just that year after year after year, yeah, I'd be like, okay, stop. I'd probably say that at like 2 or 3 for, you know, but I don't think that they're gonna just make all of them, you know, PG-13 buddy comedies. You know, they've given us, since Disney bought the franchise, and I appreciate they don't get credit for Prey. Prey was completely ready to be made. You know, they actually get a demerit on that one because Fox was apparently, as far as I understand, going to actually film it with the actors speaking in their native tongue, you know, the Native American. I'm afraid I forget which, and my wrists are too sore to look it up right now, but you know, instead Disney just made it a dub. But since Disney, you know, we've gotten two hard R, you know, Predator movies, and then this. So I don't think that they're just gonna, you know, because think about it, they could have made Prey PG-13, you know? It would have sucked. It would have been a terrible idea, but, you know, they could have, and they didn't. I am very excited to see where they go next. And I wasn't for a while for Predator, you know? So, yeah. The dialogue is very nicely done. They have this thing where I'm gonna have to start naming characters now. The protagonist, Predator, is named Deck, and he meets an android called Thea. Deck does not like to talk. Thea does. If you thought, 3PO was chatty, you have not got the slightest, faintest idea of how much Thea loves to talk. And they have some fun with that. It's a classic straight straight man comedic sidekick setup. Deck is very much just like business oriented, whereas Thea is fascinated by the world. And let's see. This one does have some dialogue in the Predator language. There's more in this one movie than in the others combined. And that, again, is something I did not think would work. I didn't think it worked well in the fourth movie. But Dan Trachtenberg is just so freaking good at making this work. Because, and I understand some people thought there was too much lore in this. I respect but disagree with that opinion. I certainly understand that if you're not particularly invested in Yautja, which is what the Predators are called, I'm so glad they have a name. I know it wasn't for this movie. I think it was in the comics first, and then the first time it appeared in one of these movies was Killer of Killers. But yeah, here they are also referred to as Yautja, and if you do it right, you can have a lot of dialogue with, Yautja. And actual, I got invested in the story of Deck. And that, again, is something I did not think would happen outside of the games. When I play as Predator in Alien vs. Predator 2, deeply invested. Not that much in the first AVP, like the one from 1999, because it barely has a story. I don't even remember about the third one. I think I liked at least some of the gameplay. Anyway, I think that covers that. So yeah, the direction, the way that Dan the story and the themes, he has such a firm grasp on. And the world building, the way that this is sort of a character study, and yeah. I guess I'll briefly note. So one of the things about, a Predator as like the protagonist in one of these movies, instead of just instead of games and such, where it's just different. The player is, once you've played for a while as a specific character, you're gonna start identifying with that character to some degree. That doesn't mean that you can't be a good person and play as an evil character or such, but there's gonna be some level of identifying with, games have a leg up in that department. But the Predator movies are essentially all Die Hard. And I'm not saying anybody ripped anybody off. I think the first Die Hard came out 1 year after the first Predator. That was how they were making action movies in the 80s, You check for yourself, But yeah, you have at least one character stuck in this unfortunate situation where they have to kill something that it's like, how are they going to accomplish this? Predator movies are Die Hard if, holy crap, am I seriously not remembering his... Is it Alan Gruber? No, that doesn't sound right. Gruber. I know his last name is Gruber. That I feel confident in saying. If he was an extraterrestrial that liked to hunt humans for sport, instead of, I guess I don't want to give away exactly what he is and does, but, and yeah, a Predator does slot into the John McClane role as long as Gruber is now, something other than a Yautja, but something very, yeah, something that a Yautja would want to hunt. And I think that pretty well covers it. Yeah, so the cinematography, I was amazed by how legible every second of action was, and there's a lot of action. Don't worry about that. There's and yet it's not overpowering. I've talked about before. I hate when action is overpowering. I do think, to me at least, Resident Evil Apocalypse, wasn't always the case. Didn't, wasn't, yeah. When I was a teenager, I really vibed with the pace. The most recent time I watched it, which I guess is 10 years ago or something, I found it kind of exhausting, and that was on rewatch, knowing everything that was coming. And yeah, the fact that this movie has so much action, like, yeah. And the camera work is creative. Sometimes it carefully follows the action. Other times the camera is sort of placed at a little bit of a distance and you can see what is happening without it moving. And I think that pretty well covers that. The editing is also great. One thing is the fact that this is trimmed down. I already mentioned, some people will find there's too much lore. It's not really for people. I already made my point about that. I'm going to move on. But yeah, it doesn't have anything that it doesn't really need to be there. Everything is setting up for something else, and this is something Dan Trachtenberg is just unbelievably good at. Okay, at some point I'm going to watch his Cloverfield movie, I swear. All three of his Predator movies, he does such an amazing job. Setup and payoff. And the way that stuff will pay off in a really unexpected way, too. I suppose if I were to criticize one editing decision, there's something in here that I don't think needed to be. I felt like there was a tiny bit too much of, and this, I don't know if it was maybe a studio note or something, because I was not the only person who loved it in Prey, but the thing about that bit where you see multiple animals kill each other and you observe the food chain, the hierarchy, that was necessary in Prey, in part because it's, the Predator is witnessing it, and we're seeing it understand learn, because it could have killed from right away, but it waits to see the food chain, and it tells us that the Predator is, because the Predator is at the top of the food chain. We humans used to be. Now it's Yautja. When in a world that has Yautja are higher on the food chain than humans. And here, at least once, because it does happen more than once, okay, I suppose it really does only happen twice, but that's, I think, at least one time too many. Because one of the times where it happens in this, it doesn't actually lead to anything. It's just kind of saying, yep, this is dangerous place this is. And we just don't need to see it. I don't know. I mean, I think it's because it feels so much like they're just, it's that sequel thing that Hollywood does way too often, where they'll repeat something and have it be a lesser version on the repeat, and yeah, I don't know. They should have maybe had something else, or I'm not even sure they do need anything there, because it's not very long after we do get stuff that shows, harshness. Yeah. Production value is extremely high. You can really tell they spent a lot of money on this thing. And the set design, there are some spectacular sets and locations in this. They really did create a planet where it feels like, okay, everything's just that, I think this is what they were going for in, what's that movie called? After Earth? I'm not ruling out watching some Shyamalan again. Don't think I'm going to be watching that one. But yeah, this really does feel like a planet where everything is just incredibly lethal, and we're kind of watching Deck try to navigate, this. Yeah, he's never been there, but he knew that it would be dangerous, and he's, they're doing that Hollywood trope, knew it would be dangerous, didn't realize how dangerous. And yeah, costumes and makeup do a really good job. The synthetic, the androids that we see here feel, because these are similar androids to the ones we saw in the Alien franchise, and it feels of that, but also distinct enough. Not, it doesn't feel like they're just doing the exact same thing. The music is incredible. It really adds to the intensity in a yeah. The sound design, holy crap. Some really gnarly, like, there's crunch to it. Like, it feels like you could basically like reach into the screen and this stuff would exist in the real world. I have been watching movies for over 30 years now, 3 decades. This is the first time in a little while where I was like, I'd be sitting in the theater seat and being like, ugh, I don't want, stop that. Keep it away from me, kind of thing. That was, yeah. Let's see. So, characters, I've already talked a little bit about. I'll just say there's something going on with Deck that makes him more complex. I didn't know going in what it would be, and I don't think you should either, but just be aware there's more here than you might think, and I really appreciate it. I hope, I don't know, I haven't watched every TV spot. I think I've watched, were there more than 2 trailers? They didn't give it away. I really appreciate that. I hope they don't end up giving it away in any kind of marketing, because holy crap, yeah. There are other characters. I don't think I really want to detail them, because there's so much. Yeah, I don't want to spoil anything. I'll just say I thought that it was deeply compelling the way the characters related to each other, the various, just, yeah. And the acting is solid. Yeah, my research is sort of look it up right now. I'm not sure I've seen, so I'm worried I would mispronounce his name, so I'm afraid I'm just going to have to call him Dex Actor. Not sure I've seen him in anything else. I'd like to. This was a fantastic performance. Like, honestly, yeah, up there with Kevin Peter Hall, R.I.P. Up there with Manu Bennett in the Hobbit trilogy. Like, really, really impressive, because we got to keep in mind, like, we're not seeing his, like, I think it's CG. I don't think they can make a really good head. They can move the mandibles and all that stuff in a way that so I'm pretty sure it's CG head, a face. I mean, so basically we're not getting, you know, like his eyes and mouth and facial features and such are not able to do that much, and he still manages to express so much. And I appreciate, okay, so obviously some of the praise goes to the people animating the face, obviously. And I think by now, like, he probably had the little dots on his face so they can get at least a decent chunk of the, but at the same time, the way the human mouth moves and the way a Yaoche mouth moves are very, very different. So, and I gotta see Elle Fanning and more. Was that her in Babel? I did watch Babel. Um, but I think these might be the only ones. I like her sister Dakota Fanning. That's also fairly little that I've seen her in. Push, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I'm not the biggest fan of that movie, but I think she does a really solid job. In general, the acting is really great in that movie. Yeah, I was very impressed by Elle here. The way that she's able to convey this, like, there's this energy, this kind of youthful vibe to her, where she's just so curious and fascinated by the world around her, contrasting Deck being very, focused and no nonsense kind of thing. And she's like, can I go see that? It reminded me a little bit of, like, um, Wonder Woman 1, the solo movie, where when she goes to the world of man and wants to, baby ice cream, all that stuff. Like, yeah, I love when movies, like, I think I appreciate that it's very difficult today because capitalism really tries to grind us down, but when possible, we should try to appreciate, the joys in life, and yeah, I really appreciate when they do this. And it's also, I love that in both of these movies, it is a female character doing it. Obviously, in the real world, it's not limited exclusively to, women and girls, but there are a number of women and girls who are more like that than a number of men and boys. And in both of these, it's not a negative. Like, there are characters who are annoyed by it, but it's not actually made out to be a bad thing. Um, yeah, I think, and that's not a spoiler. That's, like, you find that out as soon as you meet her character in this movie. And I think that might more or less cover. Right, and at the same time, there's times where she is more, like, serious, and it feels like it's still part of the same character, which is very difficult to do. And it is also, I don't think the term is manic pixie dream girl, but it could have, her character could have ended up feeling like she just exists to get Deck out of his shell, and that's not the case. There's more going on with her than her relationship with him. The pacing is amazing. Like, I legit felt like the movie lasted, like, I don't know, minutes. I mean, I haven't looked, but it's gotta be, I don't know. I mean, it can't have been less than 90, right? Minutes. So And that again is something that Dan is so freaking good at. These movies just fly by. I am in awe of how much he manages to fit in and not have it outstay its welcome. The special effects are very impressive. There are a couple of places where you could see, okay, they switched to a digital double, and I really don't blame the actual artists working on this. I can imagine, I mean, I know with some of the MCU, Disney just suddenly decided, no, we're going to do this instead, and didn't give the effects department enough time. I wouldn't rule out that that's what happened. And most of the time, it is seamless, which is one of those things that was necessary, but it's also so deeply impressive. Holy crap, the fact that they managed to make all of this stuff look so real, because we're on a planet that doesn't exist with creatures that don't exist and weapons and equipment that don't exist. So there's so much. I think they went practical when they could, but that wasn't that much of the time. Like a lot of the time they had to animate stuff. As an action movie, this is jaw-dropping. Like, there is such an immense amount of action. I think I may have said it before. Action movies today, the big budget ones, some of them fit as much action in just one movie as like some 80s action classics fit, like two, maybe even three movies. And yeah, they get really creative with the action, not really letting there's almost no limitations here. It's really just like imagination and budget, and the budget I think was quite high. So yeah, just imagination, and they have a very like I don't know if it was Dan exclusively. Yeah, I mean there's departments working under him. They came up with so many different things to happen. It's just yeah. And I was always emotionally engaged. There are some action movies that deliver, there's the amount of action that is, expected today from Blockbuster with a big budget, but there's not always the emotional connection. And here I was always like, I really wanted things to work out. I wanted Deck to win. I saw a non-zero number of reviewers say that despite how much action there was no tension. I am not gonna speculate. I don't understand how that is your conclusion. Fair enough, to each their own. I'm just gonna say I was always like, yeah, I was on the edge of my seat. Like every holy crap, just throughout. There's so much tension and suspense. Things move so fast, but not to the point where you just can't quite keep up. And yeah, like there's so many times in the other movies where the predator is in no danger, and I get that that's part of the point. I just think after yeah, again, outside of one Prey and Killer of Killers, I don't think it was super interesting. Those movies do have some times where it feels like, okay, the predator's just unstoppable, but here, like Deck, without losing, like he still feels like a Yautja, but there are times where he is definitely in danger. He is not the one who knocks. And again, I never would have thought, like years ago, I simply would not have believed, yeah. But they actually managed to do it. Yeah, like the fact that there are all these different species and Yautja weapons and equipment and settings, like they are not in the same spot on the planet throughout. They go to different parts of it, and yeah, they get so much mileage out of all this stuff. And yeah, so the comedy, I will definitely admit, it's one of those things. There is some MCU comedy going on here, both in amount of jokes and the fact that, while I would not say that one of them ever actually had a laugh replace a genuine emotion, in my opinion, there definitely are times where they happen in close proximity to an emotion. Yeah. And I mean, I don't think that ever like really ruined anything for me. There is at least one spot where a joke is pushed just a tiny bit too long. There is a good variety to the jokes. Yeah, sometimes it's Thea sure does talk a lot, or Dex sure does speak his mind even when he shouldn't, but other times there's like sight gags. There is at least one joke that I really wasn't expecting to be in this. If you just cannot stand, MCU humor kind of thing, yeah, ultimately that might ruin the movie for you. I hope that isn't the case. The reviews I read, I looked at Metacritic and Rotten Tomatoes. It was very well received, at least so far. I'm not sure all reviews have been counted yet, but I don't want to be Trump and be like, we won. We did win. But I think, does that, I guess I do want to say, yeah, when I say MCU humor, I do want to acknowledge recently they've been going easier on that in the MCU, other than Marvel Zombies. But then I heard somewhere that was like the voice work was recorded years ago, and they just only now recently released it. So okay, and they also do seem to like the animated ones having lots of humor, and I do maintain I like the humor better in that show than in What If. Anyway, this is one of those cases where they don't go overboard. I will acknowledge that there are times, like not long after Thea is introduced, there is a chunk there, several minutes, where they are, essentially almost constantly trying to make you laugh, but it's not that many minutes, and it is part of the character. It's not like it just comes out of nowhere, or that there's like no payoff to it. The horror element, very important for Predator media, is also quite strong. There are some things in this where it's like, holy crap. They really they like pushing the PG-13 rating. Disney have been pushing that for, I don't know, over a decade now. I'm not sure when the first time. Certainly I noticed it in Captain America 2, Winter Soldier. I don't know, there might have been some stuff in from the start of Phase 1. I forget, but yeah, they've especially been pushing it in the last 10 years or so, and yeah, by now it's gotten pushed really, really far. It used to be that PG-13 horror was only good if it was psychological horror. This isn't really psychological horror, but it is very effective. The sci-fi elements are great. They do such a good job of some of the stuff that Deck has is like riffs on stuff that we've seen Predators of other movies have. It never feels like they're just like doing that exact same thing again without, really any variety there. And the what's the word? They managed to come up with some new ones that feel like they belong, but it's not stuff we've seen before. And yeah. So one of the things about the PG-13 rating being pushed, if the thing that we're seeing is not sufficiently humanoid, you can get away on a PG-13 rating with doing some really messed up stuff to it. Like, this does have actual gore, bloody, violent gore. And I think Dan is really, really talented at pushing it to a level where he manages to stop just short of it being like gratuitous or excessive. Like, the let's see, in Prey you have I want to say, is it maybe the snake? I think, yeah, the snake being skinned and left there, which is also just such a great, because snakes do change hem, but they're not supposed to lose all their skin just like that. Anyway, yeah, that was really, really graphic. You also have the bear being killed by the Yautja in that movie. Really graphic, goes right up to the edge, but doesn't quite cross, in my opinion. Again, if you're watching one of these movies, yeah, there's gonna be some gore. But yeah, this definitely takes full advantage of the fact that you can get really, really intense with gore. And I guess I'll briefly note, I think if you haven't watched the trailers, they don't give too much away. They just give you an idea of sort of the setup without spoiling. In my opinion, I watched them and I'm glad I did. I didn't feel like they gave too much away. But the use of the technology and weapons and such of Deck, the creative use, and it's the right amount. It's one of those things where the Predator in some of the other movies is so much more powerful and advanced than we are, and that's part of the point. So he's running around with ridiculous weaponry and just like taking his time, just enjoying hunting us, kind of thing. When you have a Yautja protagonist, you can't really do that if you want to tell the underdog story again. So yeah, Deck, there's it's explained why there are certain things that he does not have access to. And this is, again, like, I felt that was frustrating in Alien versus Predator 1, again, it was just a question of tone and story reason. Paul W.S. Anderson. If he keeps writing, I feel like eventually, just statistically, he's bound to write something that's actually unironically good, not just something you can enjoy if you're in the right mood for it. So there is, let's see, according to Google, there's like one post credits. Is essentially, it happens right before the credits start rolling. Like the last scene ends, and then it shows the scene that hypothetically would have been post credits, and then the credits are rolling. So you don't have to stay through the credits, as far as I've seen according to Google. And yeah, I think that does cover. So yeah, my updated ranking, worst to best, every Predator franchise movie. AVP 1, AVP 2, 3, 4, 2, 1, and then the ones I love: Prey, Badlands, and Killer of Killers. Yeah, wow. Sorry. Killer of Killers right below Prey. Yeah. I wasn't expecting this to be even better than Prey. But yeah, it somehow it took Dan to beat Dan. And yeah, I rank this 8 Yautja buddy comedy action extravaganzas out of 10. And from here on out, I am spoiling absolutely everything about this movie. So you have been warned. Yeah. Honestly, I think I'm going to start with just like future predictions. So you know, I think they could make just an entire movie that is just like Deck and his found family trying to survive his mother trying to avenge his father. They could jump into the ship, because it's right there. It's very close by. Jump into their ship, fly away. Their mother follows them. They stay on one planet for a while, have an adventure there. Mom shows up. They have to go to another planet. You know, maybe one of the, maybe near the end, they get to a planet that has like xenomorphs on it, and we get some Alien versus Predator action. Um, I don't know. I mean, hypothetically, maybe instead of a fight, maybe Mother just exiles. Like, we don't know if she had, like, Father wanted to kill Deck, but maybe Mother is more of an exiler. Maybe she exiles him and the found family to a planet that has xenomorphs, and we have, like, aliens, only with them as the, main characters instead of humans. I've said it before. I think the way to do a good Alien versus Predator movie is to just not have human characters in it, because we are the least interesting. Like, listen, we just want to see Yautja and Xenos fight, And now we have, a Yautja with a face and a name. If Deck fights xenomorphs, I am invested. That's not necessarily going to be the case if it was, let's say that there's like an alternate universe, a what if scenario of Predator 1, where the Predator accidentally lands on a planet full of xenomorphs. and it's just that predator fighting xenomorphs for 90 minutes. If you don't humanize him, I might think it's cool, but I'm not going to be emotionally invested. But yeah, here, anyway, that's one thing. Hypothetically, maybe the survivors of Killer of Killers show up to help against Mom, and they join the family unit of Deck and the others, and then they have to deal with all the predators hunting them. Again, hypothetically, maybe we end up in a xenomorph. Like I wouldn't hate if like they chase, maybe Mom, maybe the other the predators hunting the killer survivors. Maybe they end up on a xenomorph planet by accident. There's too many xenomorphs. They have to work together, so you have like a bunch of predators and then these other characters. And okay, so I know I just said, no humans in an Alien vs. Predator. I would be okay with it if it were the killer ones. But yeah, I think that could be really cool. Having just this massive swarm, and I appreciate, technically AVP1 does show a massive swarm of xenomorphs, but it's such a brief, just like, I don't know, 10-second shot, and then they put it in the trailer, so we thought that would be a scene. Yeah. But yeah, having something like that, having just a ridiculous amount of xenomorphs, and so the predators, despite having all this equipment and such, they still can just barely make it. Similar to how in this movie, Deck at times, like, he has this ridiculous equipment, but he can still barely get by. Yeah, I think that might. I like the theme. Found family sometimes trumps birth family, biological family, and I appreciate technically it's a little pushing it to be calling Thea and Tessa biological family, whatever. And yeah, this thing of like, I know it's either Disney woke washing or they're just like saying, no, like, just generically fight against systems. But yeah, if the system is harmful, then fight it, because Thea fights Weyland-Yutani, Deck fights, he's fighting with his family, and I think, does that pretty much bring us to the, but yeah, I like to think, and maybe even if it's not intended, it might be read as like a revolutionary message, but yeah, there's a very anti-alpha, the kind of, alpha male, an anti-individualism message. It's very much about this community. Deck would have died multiple times over if not for Thea and also Bud. And let's see. We are already seeing a lot of young people really, realizing, no, we have to work together. We should focus on fighting the rich and powerful. And again, I'm not talking about Jewish people. A lot of the most rich and powerful are white and male. I'm also not talking about like, I know that's the thing. There's this really nasty, toxic atmosphere. A lot of YouTubers, if they say, oh, we got to watch out for them, they're like targeting minorities. They're not talking about the actual, yeah. Wealth should be redistributed. I'm not talking about hurting anyone. Violence should always be the last resort in real life. It solves almost no problems. Probably not just kicking the can down the road. Not saying it's never necessary. It was necessary to fight the Nazis in World War II. Stonewall was necessary, but always think very carefully before you engage in any violent act. It's cathartic in media, in fiction, you know. I think that pretty much covers everything overarching. I like the way that, so basically, Thea and Tessa had a very similar experience, but they react to it very differently, you know. Tessa goes back to her original programming. It really messed her up. You know, it's essentially like we're seeing two different trauma responses, you know. With Tessa, she's like, I mean, going back to her toxic ex, I guess, is the, yeah. And Thea, having spent, you know, almost 2 weeks away from the you know, company that, you know, owns her and gives orders that she has to obey, she actually really embraced this freedom. And you know, yeah, like she's chatty, but it's because she wants to know more about the world. She looks at all this stuff that she was not supposed to think about as anything other than a potential source of profit for her, you know, masters. And that's a, yeah, it's wonderful the way that she just, you know, yeah, like Deck is constantly like, that thing's gonna kill me, and Thea's like, how does it kill you though? You know, like we should all have that curiosity, you know. And eventually, yeah, Deck does start thinking about things outside of the box that he's been taught. You know, both of them, you know, needed to think outside the box. Thea got there sooner than Deck, but yeah. Um, yeah, I think I've said in my video on Alien vs. Predator 1 that I don't think in a movie you can make it work to have a human and a predator work together. And I appreciate technically not human android, but still similar. And yeah, it was a tonal issue. You know, that was why it didn't work in Alien vs. Predator. You know, Paul W. Anderson is always, he's not the best at making a tone that completely makes sense for it. There's often at least one thing that just kind of messes with the consistency of the tone to where it starts to struggle, you know. And that does, yeah, I thought it worked really well with the twist. I did not realize until, you know, we you know, we're supposed to realize it when the at the mother, not Dex, so, crap, because there's three mothers. I just realized that, and that's also interesting. You know, the creature mother, I think it's Kavik. Yeah, can't look it up right now, so it's, I hope it's Kavik. You know, yeah, adult Kavik is a good mother, wants to take care of her young. Mother with two U's, very me oriented, not a good mom, very controlling, and you know, if they ever give her a face, maybe they should have, I'm afraid I forget her name, but the actress from Matriarch, the matriarch from Matriarch, I think she'd be a good pick for that. And then yeah, Deck's mother, who we don't technically know exactly if she's going to attack or exile or what. It definitely feels like setting up a conflict more than, you know, any kind of, yeah, you know, there's the thing about, is that a friend of yours? And he says, no, it's my, that's my mom. And yeah, I think that is also, I mean, hypothetically, maybe the next Predator thing, movie, show, or whatever, is gonna, that follows up on this. Maybe mom just says, thanks for killing your dad. I know he killed your bro. Um, there's an issue that needs your attention in the clan, and we meet more Predator characters, more Yautja, and they have like an actual, like an extended cast with a bunch of Yautja, because essentially in this, you really only meet 3, and 2 of them have very little screen time. I think that could work. Now this works as a proof of concept. Yeah, you can center your movie on a Yautja who doesn't speak, English. I'm not saying he should. I'm not, oh, this is America. Not one of those. I guess I will briefly note, so she says, first she tries using his language, and then she says, is this better? I'm using my universal translator. That means that to you it sounds like Yautja, and to others it sounds like their language, which is bordering on too meta, because like she's basically saying, listen, audience, I know it sounds like English to you, trust me, I'm speaking Yautja to him, okay? That I was okay with. It bugged me a little when later on she does speak English to Tessa and then clearly speaks Yautja to Deck. That felt a tiny bit awkward. At the same time, like, her performance is so strong, I don't know if it would have come across. I don't think it would have come across quite as well if she had been speaking the Yautja language the whole time. Did I mention in the review itself? I think they did a really solid job on. There's so much Yautja spoken, and they designed the language. I'm not sure if they had designed it before this, because this isn't the first time, but it's the most of there's, I already mentioned how much there is, but yeah, they did a really good job. It sounded extraterrestrial, but also like there was a logic to it. When you're like imitating a language you don't speak or making up a new one, try to be careful to not just make it, too limited. Okay, I'm afraid I only really have a Danish reference, so that's what you're getting. The Danish comedian, Dirk Passer, R.I.P. There's this bit he did where he was supposed to be like Russian, and he keeps repeating the same few sounds that, yes, are Russian, but that's not the entire language, no, like, of the ones that I've listened to, people speak, usually in media, I don't encounter that many people who, anyway, in real life. I'm not avoiding them or anything, but it's usually media. The languages I've heard, they tend to have more variety to them than it's just a few sounds. And that the thing is, if you don't pay close enough attention, or if you just don't know, if you don't think too much about it, yeah, you might sound like, oh, they keep making that noise, so I guess that's their entire language. And I think they did a fantastic job here not doing that. It never felt like they were just saying nonsense words, Yeah, overall, I guess I don't have a good solution to the issue that I mentioned about her, you know, whether or not she's speaking Yautja or English, and yeah, it also did feel a tiny bit like, okay, we get what a universal translator is, and it's also I don't know, maybe if they did what's that thing in what's it called, Hunt for Red October, where they have they speaking or singing in Russian, and then like it transitions into English, and for the rest of the movie we just accept, okay, they are technically speaking Russian. It just sounds like English to us. Maybe that could have worked. I don't know. I'm not entirely sure. Anyway, I think that does bring us to the proper scene by scene. So yeah, the very start, you have the couple of animals, they kill each other, and then Deck speeds by. Deck the Yautja. Too fast for the naked eye, but we didn't really need that. I think the one on um, Genna, I think it was called, that planet, there we did need it. I don't think we need it on Yautja Primus. I do appreciate Yautja Primus. I mean, I don't know how big the planet is, but so far it's very consistent look, because I'm pretty sure Yautja Primus was also what we saw the last segment of Killer of Killers, and there was also this kind of deserty with mountains and such. Anyway, so yeah, the way that Deck and Zweig, was that his brother's name? Let's go with that. The way that they fight, and this thing of like, yeah, Zweig already has the cloaking device, for example, and some of the time he's kind of wiping the floor with Deck. Deck just isn't quite as adept as Zweig Lowenstein, and yeah, at one point, like, Deck like falls down this steep fall and grabs the sword again. I think they did a good job on so they needed the sword to be more than just like steel, and the plasma sword, so that's, yeah, because you don't want it to be like a lightsaber. That would go too far, but I thought they did a good job with that. And yeah, at one point Zweig turns his back on Deck because he's like, please just stop, and that's a very like older brother kind of thing of like, you're embarrassing yourself, little bro, come on. And yeah, he let's see, yeah, we don't even see the last bit of the fight because, like, yeah, Zweig won. And then you have the thing about, why'd you keep this toy? And Zweig points out, it's to remind us, there was that time where you saved me. And even though, we don't speak the Yautja language, we can tell, when he says, you saved me, that's not really like, maybe there is a thank you in there, but there is also that's not the Yautja way. If I can't survive on my own, I should die. That is, how we're supposed to do this, So we see that Deck does have it in him to save others, and he does save Thea. He says she's just his tool, but, he doesn't feel comfortable admitting that she's a friend of his. I think that pretty much gets us to, yeah, and they talk about, okay, so you have to hunt, you have to prove yourself. And he's like, Genna, I'll hunt the Calic. And, Zweig is like, it's unkillable. And Deck points out, That's why I have to kill it, because you think I'm weak. I have to prove myself, you know. I did almost say earlier that the Predator movies are like Rocky if it was life or death instead of boxing, you know, for uh, prestige and other reasons. And if the opponent was extraterrestrial. Ultimately, I don't feel it's more like that the movies tend to end or sometimes end like Rocky. You know, you have to prepare yourself and go outside your comfort zone in order to get results, kind of thing. You know, but it's not the entire movie. Um, but yeah, that was very Rocky. I will definitely say there are times where there's Rocky DNA in here, in this franchise. I mean, um, and then yeah, so they go outside the ship, and their father shows up, and I love that the white and I what was that the case in Killer of Killers? Maybe also white dreadlocks. I forget, but it might have been. But yeah, you know, that's a way to denote, okay, this one is older than the others, you know, and there's maybe some authority there. Um, and yeah, he says, what are you waiting for? You were supposed to kill Deck. So Swike knew that, and he couldn't bring himself to do it. And you know, yeah, the right, and we also before that we have the line of, you know, if you fail to kill the Calic, you will die. And then he says, then I won't fail, which is such a Hollywood, you know, macho man line. Yeah, I kind of love some of those. I'm not gonna lie. Um, you know, in real life, I really can't stand um, machismo. Again, it's just it does not solve problems. It just makes the person and their supporters feel big. I think that does, but yeah, you know, so really great when so yeah, they chain up with the electrical thing Deck, and Zweig is supposed to cut his head off, and he says, you know, something like be brave. And you know, we and he interpret Deck, I mean, interpret it as, you know, accept your death, but he means, you know, you're gonna survive this, and I want you to be brave. You know, because he knows that his father will kill him for this, you know, and so instead of chopping off the head, he chops up the electrical, you know, and we have one of those. I know it's a trope. They go, oh, why did the bad guy leave it to an underling who then betrays him? In parts of the story can happen, and also just I do think that it is meaningful. You know, their father wants, you know, he thinks that it's we. He even says, you know, if to refuse to execute someone, even your own brother, is weakness, and the penalty is death. You know, that this is their law, and Zweig knew that, and their father assumed. Which, you know, you got to be careful about assumptions. You make an ass out of you an umption. He assumed, like, Zweig is not going to die for this weakling brother, you know, and yeah, the let's see, yeah, just fantastic fight, and I love the fact that, yeah, ultimately, like, Zweig, you know, they can't really defeat it. It's only at the end that Deck is able to defeat their father, which is also such a great bit of setup and payoff, because when we see him kill Zweig, after there's a fight between them, you know, I wasn't thinking, oh, there's definitely the I don't know, maybe I was supposed to whatever. But I wasn't realizing that at the end, Deck was going to be able to kill their father. You know, it was just is an effective dramatic moment. It felt almost Shakespearean, And I do appreciate, like, we gotta have more media where in patriarchy there's a number of fathers who will pit their sons against each other, and it's so detrimental and destructive. Like, wars have been waged just because someone had to prove that they were good enough because there was more than one, potential ruler. And it's and part of that is, of course, that we have to get away from dictatorships, which yeah, especially relevant today in countries like America. But the let's see, I guess that, yeah, I will say I don't mind that it's happened. There's a trope that I think maybe Dan Trachtenberg needs to work on, not overusing. I don't know if I think it's overused, but I think if it happens again, it might be. I mean, if I had a nickel for every time a Dan Trachtenberg Predator movie had someone, use the wrist computer either after the that Yautja is dead or the arm has been chopped off or that sort of thing, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it's happened twice. Yeah, I don't think it would be the worst thing in the world if he doesn't do that again, or at least not for a long time. Like, if he wants to make like 10 Predator movies, as long as they're this good, you know. But yeah, in that case, I think he should wait a while before he uses it again. But it was cool. I will absolutely acknowledge. But yeah, and then we have the let's see. Yeah. So and Deck does try to get out and help fight. But yeah, the vessel flies to Genna. I appreciate that near the end we don't actually get like a montage of them fixing it, because it's like, well, they know where it is. There's no reason why they couldn't fix it, So yeah. And yeah, so we see why he doesn't have a wrist blade for a chunk of this. It broke on the door. He doesn't have a mask. Let's see, was that one left? I think that was in the ship, and he uses the escape pod, which doesn't have his mask. And for yeah, most of his equipment was in the ship itself, so he only really has the couple of things that he had on him or in the escape pod. The plasma sword and bow and arrow. I love the fact that the bow and arrow, he doesn't have to draw arrows from a thing. It just makes new arrows. That's very cool. But yeah, when I watched Alien vs. Predator 1, I was annoyed that acid blood could melt the wrist blade, because it's like, okay, I get that, oh, they're not used to this sort of thing. Okay, well then why are we watching them? That's not very interesting, And they don't have their shoulder cannons for a while because they were inside the temple and they didn't get to them. The humans did. Okay, but that's not very interesting, and it's super annoying, the fact that, like, one of the archaeologists literally says, don't do that, and he still does, which ends up getting them killed. There's only one human who survives the entire movie, and maybe it could have been different if they hadn't, but yeah. Here, it felt satisfying, and it really felt earned when by the end he does have, he has he did make a mask and some armor and a shoulder cannon. It's organic now, and a wrist blade. That was really, really cool. And that also felt like, yeah, a Predator movie. They like to end them with the protagonist gearing up for the battle. Yeah, I think that does bring us to, so yeah, he I love that, like, even the going into the atmosphere is like breaking this ship apart, which is also, When they're repairing it there at the end, Thea, probably in a very chatty way, can explain, okay, so in order for the ship to survive, the atmosphere, here's what we gotta do, because she would know because, Weyland Yutani got it right. Yes, but yeah, he uses the escape, pod to even be able to get onto the planet. That's also just such a cool idea that the planet is that hostile, that is that difficult to even get onto. Holy crap. But yeah, he immediately has to fight these, branches. So Gana has Kandarian demons, I guess. And I love the fact that he keeps trying to get the upper hand and then another branch appears or one of them attacks in a way he wasn't prepared for. And, at the end, he finally is able to get away from them. And then he stands there and they're like, we can't catch up. And then they start, did they attack each other or something else at least? Anyway. But yeah, and he walks and he sees the things with the poison darts, and it's very clever the way that, he doesn't, nobody says, if you get really close to them and move fast, they're gonna explode in your face. I did see someone say, oh, it's like a video game. I can acknowledge that that part was a little video game-y, but, I was invested in all of the action and such. But yeah, at one point he moves fast and a little too close, and it gets close to exploding, so he slows down, moves a little bit away from it, and it calms back down. And then there's the pterodactyl thing up there, and Thea, calls out to him and explains that thing is going to keep, it's going to try to make the things shoot at you. If you throw me a weapon, I can free myself and come help you. And he throws the so freaking cool that little thing. And he's attacked by the pterodactyl thing, and she jumps, and I love that it's like off screen, but we just see like spurts of blood, way more blood than you'd be able to do in a PG-13, no matter what color it is. Just like, I don't know, 15 years ago, I think, probably couldn't have gotten away with this for those meddling kids. But and then she's like, hi, and waving as he's passing out. Like, that was great. And yeah, he wakes up and she didn't hurt him. She even took care of him somewhat, and that's not something he's used to. Yautja hunt alone. Everything else is prey. There was that thing about they are predators to all. That's part of their code. And he eventually, says, oh, you're my tool. Is she? Or are you rationalizing? He doesn't want to admit. He likes having a friend, and that there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah, and it's so true. There's a lot of men who, because of toxic masculinity, really struggle with friendship. A lot of them don't think that you can be friends with a woman. You can only have her as a partner. Or hook up maybe, but you can't be like friends in a way that, yeah. So it's really great that the movie is pushing back against that. Although I appreciate, obviously, it's not saying, oh, sexual. I never got the sense of sexual tension between the two of them. Just him struggling to admit that they're friends, and her going along with his rationalization. Because like a lot of people would say, I'm not your tool, and like him objectifying her like that, but again, that is sometimes part of the journey. I'm not saying any woman should have to accept that. If you are a woman and you wouldn't accept that, you're not wrong. But when, we have a story like this, yeah, it is, I don't know. sometimes I overanalyze. Maybe I am, but it read to me as exploring how much some men struggle to accept friendship from others. And I'm not saying that women should put up with that or be patient with that, but I do think stories like this can help, you know, maybe someone watches this and realizes, "Oh wow, I'm kind of like that and I don't want to be." And apologizes to the people that they have treated badly, and does better, you know. I think that does bring us. Yeah, I thought they did a good job. You know, it's too bad ultimately it was also in the trailer, but otherwise it was a good reveal. This thing of like, you know, he picks her up and looks down, and then we see, oh, she, you know, doesn't have legs. Um, and yeah, you know, you have, yeah, the thing about, you know, he says he doesn't, you know, want her around, and she says, well, okay then. I am absolutely not the right person to read this from, like, let's see, how do you phrase that again? Read it for like through a lens of disability. I think that disability reading, I think, is how you say it. I'm absolutely not the right person. I hope the movie did well. I 100% acknowledge there's a bunch of Disney media that really doesn't, that is very ableist. Yeah, I'm not gonna comment on it because it's not my place. I am just acknowledging that you could definitely do a reading of it, and it's important to be very sensitive with subjects like this. Now, let's see. Yeah, he does ultimately agree to have her tag along, and at first, just like, yeah, you know, so she's on. It's yeah, she's on his back. There's like a misogynistic joke there that I'm not gonna make about like, oh, she's always on his back about something. But yeah, and I appreciate this thing of like, yeah, you know, once a toxic man finally starts listening to a woman's observations and intuition and experience and such, he's able to maneuver the world much more effectively. And let's see. Yeah, you know, I love that thing where she says they just want a snack. And at first they just got to get past them, so they just like throw the food to them. And later he has them literally eating out of his hand, you know, just very, very nicely done there. Um, you know, essentially like he starts out a hunter and becomes Dr. Doolittle a little bit. He, you know, he starts really tending to their needs and taming and having pets and such. Yeah, I think that pretty much brings us to the part where, let's see. So yeah, I love that they montaged their way through some of it, because we don't need to see every second of it. We just need to get that, you know, she's helping him get past these, and as she's doing that, she's also like, you know, she is talking more than he wants to, you know, um, here. I mean, yeah. Let's see. I think that does bring us to right. And the thing about, you know, she's like, well, yeah, I met the Kalik. That's how I lost my legs. And let's see. Yeah, I think that's about. Then yeah, so they're going through. Yeah, super cool with the sharp blades of grass, and we meet Bud, and they do such a great job having all these little things that once you realize, oh, Bud is like a baby Calic. Yeah, because like It's got like this invulnerable thick skin. It's stronger than it looks. Yeah, like once you really get like, yeah, they did such a great job, because I only realized, it goes up and like sniffs and realizes, oh, my baby spit on this. And you also, that's the first time you get a really good look at the face of it. And yeah, it does look like Bud, with the, yeah. But yeah, great the way that, so yeah, they're jumping between the branches, and Bud like rolls or runs through the grass without being hurt, and then the what do they call it, Medusa? That's what I'm going with. Comes and, almost, yeah, he would have died if not for Bud. Bud gets in the mouth, was about to bite Deck's head off. Bud gets in the mouth, makes the shield, crunch, teeth fall out. It drops Deck, very, very nicely done. And let's see, yeah, and not long after, they make camp for the night, and Bud keeps imitating Deck. And this is the joke that I mentioned in the review, where I felt like they pushed it just a tiny bit too far. I think once the plasma sword was being imitated by a stick that's slightly on fire, it's like, okay, we get it. Bud is imitating Deck. Deck doesn't like it. Move on, and it moved on seconds after it got to the point where I was like, okay, that's enough. Let's see. And that's also, I would never have thought a non-verbal pet for a predator would be a good, like, I was never the biggest fan of the pred dogs, the dogs that the predators use for hunting in, I guess it's just 3 and 4. I don't know, somehow Bud worked for me. Yeah, and I love the thing about, I have no clan. I thought all Yautja had clans. I don't have a clan anymore. Well, what happened? My father killed my brother. And, you have that thing about, but why though? What actually happened there? And she even says, you're grieving, because that, the pieces are, coming together, falling into place, something like that. They're falling together. Yeah, very, very out of place. And yeah, she's like, oh, now I understand why you're kind of harsh and unpleasant, unfriendly, because yeah, it's that thing of like, well, if my dad doesn't want me, and my brother was going to betray me, okay, fine, screw everyone. I don't need any of you. I appreciate that they didn't push too far, because that could have really gotten annoying. I'm not gonna. I still struggle to keep apart what's a goth and what's an emo. I feel like one of them applies here, and I'm not saying there's anything inherently wrong with either of those subcultures. I just don't think it will work well for Predator media. I think that might. I think maybe they did in one of the parody videos or something. Anyway, but yeah. So then we have, yeah. So the morning after, he's leaving with Thea, the tool, but he doesn't bring Bud with. And she says, you should bring Bud with. And later she's very quiet, and he notes that and asks, and she says, should have brought Bud with. I am very careful to not engage in gender essentialism, which is BS. But if we're talking socialization, yeah, a lot of girls and women are better at emotional intelligence and tending to the emotional needs of other living things. Not exclusively, not, not monolithic, whatever, you know what I mean. I think That pretty well brings us to the right waterfall. Gotta have a waterfall. Not every single of these does, but several of them do. Let's see. I think, does that pretty much bring us to the... Yeah, so the let's see. She they get her to the Wayland Yutani place, and the legs work, and she's about to put them on, and I love the little miscommunication there, because which is in part, language, like it can be difficult to translate directly, so there can be miscommunications if someone's first language is not the language that they're speaking with someone whose first language it is. She's gonna stop digging, you know what I mean. And yeah, there's the thing about easier to walk. Yeah, in a minute it will be. No, for me, I can leave you now, because he's still at that point. He still hasn't accepted that there's more here than just she's not his tool, and yeah, he's still thinking I'll do this alone, and that is also like, if you were going to leave her as soon as she got her legs, why did you feel the need to make sure she got her legs? If she was just your tool, if she has no other value than that, if she's not an individual, why do you care about her needs? If you were going to stop having anything to do with her as soon as you fulfilled those needs, it's because you don't think of her as a tool deep down. You think of her as a person that's going to leave you and or hurt you. And so you're jumping to the part where you leave first, so they can't hurt you, and this is something like a lot of people at some point in their lives will go through a stage where they feel like if they just have nothing to do with other people, no one can hurt you then, kind of thing. And it's not healthy. And I, again, really appreciate media that actually explores that here. He only self-actualizes once he admits to himself he needs others. Thea, Bud, and so she says, you have to leave now. They're coming, my people are coming, and they're not gonna let you, and he's like, but I have to hunt the cowlick, is it here? And they did such a great job with the thing of, so she's trying to reattach her legs, and it's getting really close, and then like it gets knocked away, and she's like, oh come on, and her legs are right there, but she can't quite put them on, and later she finally is able to reunite with them. Again, I am not the right person to talk about whether or not that is the ableist. I just appreciate that the element is in play like that. I hope it's done respectfully. I'm not saying that it is. I'm not saying that it's not. It was an effective point of tension during the scene. But yeah, fantastic fight between, and the way that Deck slices up its belly, cuts off its crap's it called again? Tail, and it just regrows the tail, and then it uses the tail to wrap around him and attack. Like, really, really nicely done there. And then he lures the tail into the thing so he can get it stuck, and cuts off the head. And it's like, well, there you go. He can return with honor, because there's certainly no way that this thing could possibly regrow its entire head after it's been cut off, and it's happening right behind me, isn't it? Yeah, really nicely done, and genuinely felt like, okay, I guess it's unkillable. And then later, Tessa kills it. So really great bit of, because she triggered the thing from inside, and there are let's see, I forget. I've heard of some animal, insect maybe, in the real world that has like a thick armor. So yeah, if you wanted to kill it, you'd have to get something inside of it. Yeah. Let's see. I think yeah. And then it sniffs him and is like, okay. Um, I've never known Bud. Is that what you're calling him? That's not the worst name. Me and the father couldn't quite figure out exactly what we wanted to call little little Bud. That works. But yeah, when what Bud spits on, Bud gets to keep safe. So I'd shake your hand if I had hands. Is it cold in here? Is it just me? And freezes because yeah, she found we saw Tessa find the freeze grenade. Yeah, really nicely done. And yeah, so I didn't want to give this away. But yeah, obviously if you've watched the movie, Elle Fanning does two characters, and they are so wonderfully different in this. Really, like, it genuinely is. They have both been abused, and Thea is choosing I mean, essentially she was going back there, but she's going to maintain the perspective that she gained from being away from there. Tessa was shut down for those 14 days, now she's being reactivated. She is, very much a company person. She wants to do what Muthur, let's go with that so that you know which mother I'm talking about. Muthur, the AI, I guess it is. I don't know. Maybe it's just an LLM. There's really some underpaid, person fixing its mistakes, but okay. Yeah, the AI that gives orders from the company, and the the performances are so distinct that even when because there is a scene where they're both speaking English, and Thea is trying to appeal to Tessa on like a cynical level, we can still easily tell apart the two of them. Really, really nicely done. There's some wonderful subtlety to her. Yeah, I've heard really good things about. I meant to mention in the review, I've heard great things about The Great. The Great is apparently the Great, and part of it's her, part of it's Nicholas Hoult. Yeah, I think, does that pretty much get us to the let's see. Yeah, so Tessa and Thea reunited, and so the Kalik is in the cargo container, and Deck is on deck on the bed, and they're and yeah, Tessa is genuinely treating him as just a potential threat. There's no empathy in how she because she's turned that off. There was that thing about, we're more sensitive, us two sisters, and it's like, well, do you understand why? Well, yeah, so we can understand the creatures of this planet. But she's not treating him as an let's see, an end in himself. She's treating him as a means to an end, a potential means to an end, or a potential obstacle. and so she's like using electricity. I guess if Wayland Yutani had been involved in the events of Predator 4, maybe the Predator would have been properly sedated on that table. That still does feel like a, really, you're not gonna, you have nothing that can, hold a Predator in place, or you don't have, like, I'm sorry, but like enough horse tranquilizer, I feel like should probably do it, Can't you monitor the what's it called, like, yeah, there's like, because you have that with like surgery, you don't want the patient waking up in the middle of that. There's stuff you can do to monitor, and I appreciate, these, I'll never get the hang of your Yautja biology, which is just illogical, but yeah. Anyway, the let's see. Yeah, the that bit where Thea tries to, so like I said, tries to appeal to the cynical. She's like, we're not going to get that much out of Deck because he is defective. You realize that, so there's no need to take tests. But, Tessa is like, oh, well, yeah, he's defective. Well, let's destroy him then. If he's not of use to us, he has no value. And that is sadly how many corporations think. It's very ironic for Disney to be putting this out, but, I think it was Lindsay Ellis who pointed out, it's a distraction. It's like how Dumbo has a fake Walt Disney who's a grifter, and he, is not treated as like a good person by the narrative. It's so that you can watch a Disney movie and be like, oh wow, that person was bad, and feel like you somehow made a difference, even though it's still Disney getting your money for watching the movie. I appreciate it's that. I think that brings us to the, yeah, so ultimately, Thea's alone in the room with him, and they're bringing in, there's the toy, and so she speaks directly to Deck in the Yautja language, and the other androids are like, what are you doing? And yeah, she's like, I'm distracting you, you big turd muffin. But yeah, no, she says, oh, I'll translate. I speak the language, and is thinking about, okay, so what should he do? Oh, tell him to open it and then duck. And it's like, that's a toy. It's a Yautja child's toy. Which, nice morbid joke. Holy crap! And I thought that thing about uh, the finger trap. In Addams Family, the 90s, the first of the 90s Addams Family movies, was a lot. Now, let's see. Then we have the yeah, so the let's see. Ultimately, yeah, he's able to jump out of the back of it, and Thea is put in that box, which nobody puts Thea in a box. And then we have the awesome montage. He prepares. Yeah, it might be my favorite, but it's possible the one in Prey still does top it. But yeah, he's really showing a strong knack for subtle setup and payoff, because I wasn't thinking that he was going to turn those those things that just want something to eat. I didn't think he was going to weaponize one of them, or yeah, I guess several of them. It's just only one on his shoulder. Let's see. Right, and I mentioned, so there's a reason why he doesn't have his mask for most of it. It was on the ship. He wasn't near the ship. I do also think that's necessary. For we need to see his mouth, we need to see his eyes. It's just easier to relate to someone when you can see those. I mean, that's a big part of why the xenomorph does not have eyes. There's almost no version of the xenomorph that has eyes that we can see, at least. Like, I'm sure it can perceive something. There are different theories. Some believe it's purely by scent, but we can't see its eyes. We can't make eye contact with it. We can't read if the eyes are aggressive or not. So yeah. Let's see. Yeah, so he is. Yeah, we also have the legs, which again I'm not commenting on as from a disability reading kind of. I'm talking about as an element. Yeah, I thought it worked well the way that the legs would distract the android guards and he would jump in and kill them, and that was very classic. Right. I meant to say this in the review itself. I don't think the movie does too much fan service. Let's see. Yeah. What was the other thing? Yeah, it felt like classic Yautja kind of stuff. It's hunting really dangerous ones and killing them very stealthily. It was some of my favorite of that kind of stuff. Um, and the thing, like, it's in some of the others, it's that we care about the characters. Here, it's that we care about the mission that the Yautja is on. Let's see. Yeah, that is still, these three, they can't quite compete with the characters in the first movie. I do think they top the characters of the sequels, but yeah, Prey, Killer of Killers, and this, the characters are not as, and I don't know, I don't think they're trying to be. I think it's smart to not try, just do something else instead. There's enough here to make up for it, in my opinion. Obviously, if it's a big part of the appeal of the original for you, yeah, it's not gonna, I will admit the fourth one came close to having as compelling characters as the first one, but anyway, I think that does bring us to the, yeah, it was awesome when he gets like a bunch, like we just see them explode and it's like a top-down view, really, really cool. um and I mean, it's just because they're androids, so he's able to like yeah, because there was one where he ripped the head off and you see the spine. That's the kind of thing that you normally wouldn't be able to do on a PG-13, and that's where, because like at the end of the day, if there's a predator, if there's a Yautja in your movie, if he doesn't rip out at least one spine, some people are gonna leave like thinking, I'm sorry, but my rib spine out meter is completely empty. This is unacceptable. And you can apparently do it on a PG-13 as long as it's an android, as long as the blood is white and like it's clear that it's not a human. I mean, really, there is not a single human on screen at any point in this movie. It's only ever yeah, non-humans, and evidently you can do ridiculous. I mean, didn't Zwike get his head cut off? Was that father? Possibly both, honestly. That's okay. I mean, their blood is green, and they're not human. They're humanoid. But it's amazing what you can get away with on a PG-13 at this point. I really hope the rating didn't scare off too many people. I saw at least one Redditor post about, are they called Redditors if they're just posting? Yeah, because it's not, I don't think it was a mod. It was a Redditor. Yeah. Moving on. I really hope that the movie doesn't struggle on account of that. And as mentioned in the review, I do also hope that not, I don't want someone to take a kid to this, because that's too much to, yeah. And I know I'm one to talk. I watched The Thing 1982 when I was 13, but in retrospect, I think I should have waited on that. Anyway, yes, the where were we? We were at the last bit. Yeah, I quite like when she's able to get her legs back, and there's that little fight, and she like stomps the head of one of them, and like the two halves of her do different fighting, and then they're like trying to like fist bump or shake hands, but one of them only has legs and feet instead of hands. Um, yeah, and they, and the thing about, the Calic is out there. And she's like, are you seriously still obsessed with this hunt? And then Deck explains, Bud is a baby Calic. And that's all that needed to be, so that's mom. I'd be reuniting a mother and her child. Why didn't you just say so? Oh, you did, right? No, yeah, that's love that, and it's so true. Like, there's so many women out there who will move heaven and earth to help people in need. Let's see. I guess that's a decent time to plug Francesca Fiorentini. I don't feel super comfortable naming the show. I don't think that's a word for me to say. But you can find her by her name. She did a video, I think it's called Did Greta Change, or Has Greta Changed, something like that. Fantastic video. And yeah, I really admire both Francesca and Greta. And I think that pretty well brings us to the... Yeah. So they managed to free the Calic. And I love that in the trailer, it actually looked like they were fighting against the Calic with the massive, the absolute unit. I don't even know exactly what to call it. Tessa's Ride. Let's go with that. And I also really love that that's sort of an, roided up version of the power lifter from Aliens. So yeah, that's a really cool... I don't know, it didn't feel too fan servicey. It's different enough in my opinion, but yeah, instead it's Deck, Thea, and the Calic fighting against the Tessa's Ride. And yeah, so cool when we see, I mean, we knew that's definitely being driven by her, right? I know how these movies work, but when we actually see her sitting there in the cockpit or whatever it's called, and yeah, fantastic fight. Love the little bits where they're trying to like break through to the glass so they can like injure her, and her fighting back against that, and the various incredibly cool when she has the shoulder cannon. And yeah, it's genuinely really cool seeing the 3 laser dots on a Yautja, and the weapon is being used by a non-Yautja. Really, really cool. And he has to like duck out of the way and all that stuff. Fantastic. I can't believe I forgot to mention in the review, obviously the choreography is amazing throughout the action. Yeah, I think let's see. Does that pretty much bring us to the part with the thing and the person? Darn monkey. Yes, let's see. Right, I want to note, so I am on the record as not being the biggest fan of the conflict between predators in Predators, the third Predator movie. Again, it was a tonal issue and story issue. Here it works. I was deeply invested in the familial struggle, literal Yeah, I am really impressed by how like so much of this movie is the maskless Yautja speaking and yeah, doing things that wouldn't like if the tone was off, it just wouldn't work. It would become self-parody. I mean, I've mentioned it before, but for example, the Venom movies really struggle with tone, and some of the time they do just embrace, okay, I guess we're just a comedy now. We're just a dark comedy, not a horror movie, not a superhero movie. Let's see. And I'm not saying there's nothing good in those movies. I just think I've made my case about those movies in my videos on those movies. But let's see. I definitely think Disney would do a better job with Venom. Yes, let's see. So they managed to get Tessa out of her ride. They right, it was so cool when she's like picking up heavy things and attacking with them. Yeah. But yeah, they get her out of the ride, and Thea points out the difference between them and such. And yeah, she gets eaten. And we have like genuinely moving moments, and they feel like, oh, we won. This is it. And then the ice crystals start to gradually cover all of the Calic. And yeah, like that's the thing. Androids are notoriously difficult to kill, to destroy. You have to really work to get there. And evidently this is not quite enough. And yeah, she still had one of those grenades, wonderful bit of setup and payoff. I wasn't expecting them to be used more than the one time where it enabled them to take Calic with them, and Deck for that matter. But yeah, so it explodes, and I was literally sitting there thinking, you just made us care about this creature, and now you're gonna kill it. But it was right for the story. We're not, I mean, it's a Predator movie. We're not supposed to leave the movie feeling like, nothing bad happened. That was just, through and through happiness. Like something bad happens in each of these. And yeah, I really appreciate the way that, like, yeah, at the start I was thinking, oh, the Calyx, like the antagonist of the movie. And then, it becomes a victim of Weyland-Yutani, and then ends up dead. And yeah, Weyland-Yutani always looking for some kind of medical, biological weapon. That's what they were going to use Calic and Andek for. But yeah, the regenerative, they did destroy that research, didn't they? I hope so, before it got back to Weyland-Yutani. But because it's just like, listen, they're not making med beds. They're gonna just do, or I guess they're not making public med beds, like that AI slop video that Trump tweeted out for some reason. Like, holy crap. Yeah, I think that pretty well covers everything. It was cool seeing Bud much bigger there at the end. And yeah, I like the fact that, yeah, like basically, I mean, in a way, Deck was back for revenge, but he also wanted the cloaking technology. He earned it. He completed his first hunt. And yeah, the fact that, his father uses the cloaking to try to hide, and then because of the smoke, you just see like where he is. Like, such a cool visual and idea. I'm really impressed that they're still coming up with new things to do in these movies that involve Yautja, because seen, it's, let's see, almost 40 years, 38 years now, since the first time we saw a Yautja cloak. And the fact that they're still able to come up with new things, very impressive. Yeah, I think that might cover everything. Let's see. I think if there is, yeah, I think that does cover everything. It was incredibly cool when, so he's being, the two fighting between predators were so freaking cool here. I think that might also just be part of the problem with the third Predator movie. We don't actually get to see predators fighting predators. What's this freaking point of having a conflict between them? Like, all you accomplish is that one of them is like strung up for a while and then tries to help Adrian Brody, but then the ship gets blown up by one of the others, and then the strung up predator. Wow, I watched that movie so recently I already forgot. Like, I mean, I realize my memory is really bad these days, but I do think it's part, the movie's just not very memorable in my opinion. But if I recall correctly, one of the other predators very easily kills the strung up predator. Um, anyway, yeah, the here having them, it was so cool. So we see Deck, extend the spear, and it's the same spear as in the second movie, and here he uses it to stab two Yautja through the head at the same time. Like, so freaking cool. And him using it to engage in fencing. That's another thing. I didn't think they would be able to do fencing well. Like, in over the over multiple rewatches, I've warmed up somewhat to the, fight, in Predator 3, where one of the Yautja goes up against the Yakuza. I want to say, I mean, no disrespect. I hope I'm getting that right. And the Yakuza has a sword, and the I think, is it the wrist blades maybe on the, I forget, on the Yautja, but I've warmed up to that one. But I think this is much, much cooler. This is how you do that sort of thing, I think. Right, and to be clear, I'm not. I appreciate that there is. I forget what it's called, but there's a very specific, like, fighting style that they're using in Predator 3. I'm not trying to disrespect that fighting style or the people who hold it dear. Now, I think that pretty much covers everything I had to say for the movie. Yeah, just holy crap. I'm really, really glad that they're doing these. It's so nice to be optimistic about the Predator franchise, um, and also the Alien franchise. Come to think of it, yeah, like the. I guess I will just briefly note the because, like, it's no secret, I was not the biggest fan of the more recent Ridley Scott entries in the Alien franchise. I think he did a really, really solid job on the first one. And then, yeah. Anyway, hypothetically, I guess maybe there could be a crossover between this and the Alien Earth show. I mean, I'm not 100% certain if that's something that um, Noah Hawley would be interested in, but I can imagine that Disney owns the characters and they could do it with or without him. it would probably be less interesting without him. But hypothetically, I wouldn't rule out. I'm still not sure if that show's getting like a second season or not. I'm not spoiling it here. Don't worry. But the yeah, there's a lot of ways that they could do, Alien versus Predator. I think with this one they're sort of A/B testing. They're seeing if maybe people are, because this is like the most blatant crossover that doesn't have like Alien versus Predator in the title. Like, yeah, Predator 2, oh, there's the skull. Yeah, for like 5 seconds. Here we actually have Wayland Yutani throughout most of the movie. Like, at first it's just the one android, but and at the same time, like, yeah, if you've never watched an Alien movie or a Predator movie, crap, I meant to say in the review itself that you can watch this without having watched the others, whatever. Yeah, it is. Let's see, where was I? I think my head's already gone to bed. I'm gonna try to finish this real quick and then physically do so as well, because I really don't have very much more to say. Let's see. So I was talking about, hypothetically, yes, I made my point about that. So yeah, you could easily, if this gets enough buzz, if there are tons of people on the internet who all say, please have xenomorphs in the next Predator movie, or, Yautja in the next, Alien franchise project, yeah, I think they're gonna go ahead and do it. They can, and I think at this point, I mean, I'd like to see Dan Trachtenberg be the one to write and direct, but otherwise, I mean, as long as they get someone who really knows what they're doing, which at the end of the day, I don't think really was the case with the other two AVP movies. And also just like there's, I think in part too much time passed. Like there was like, what is it, 13, 12, something like that, years between Predator 2 and AVP 1. And that's just a lot of time to wait. And then it wasn't that, it was a pretty underwhelming movie, as Paul W. Anderson movies tend to be. And let's see. Yeah, I mean, I think they could make something really deeply compelling, especially if they use some of the characters that they've already established in either of these franchises or both at the same time. And yeah, just, try not to make it too much, focused on human characters that we are not that invested in, and I think part of it could work if maybe a predator and a human or multiple work alongside each other, which, for example, could be the killer of killers, humans, and Deck. I could 100% believe that the Deck would be, and you could have Thea explain to the killer of killer humans, no, don't worry, I know Deck. He's he's a friend of mine. I work with Deck, and you, sir, are no Deck.